where His love can't reach. There's no place where we can't find peace. There's no end to amazing grace. Take me in with your arms spread wide. Take me in like an orphan child. Never let go, never leave my side. I am holding on to you. I am holding on to you. In the middle of the storm, I'm holding on. I am. Love like this, oh my God, to find. I'm overwhelmed with the joy divine. Love like this sets our hearts on fire. I am holding on to you. I am holding on to you. In the middle of the storm, I'm holding on. I am holding on to you. I am holding on to you. In the middle of the storm, I'm holding on. I am. This is my resurrection song. This is my hallelujah come. This is why it's to you I run. This is my resurrection song. This is my hallelujah come. This is why it's to you I run. There's no space that His love can't reach. There's no place where He can't find peace. There's no end to amazing grace. I am holding on to you. I am holding on to you. In the middle of the storm, I'm holding on. I am holding on to you. I am holding on to you. In the middle of the storm, I'm holding on. I am holding on to you. I am holding on to you. In the middle of the storm, I'm holding on. I am. I'm in the middle of the storm. I'm holding on. I am.
Good morning. Where is summer? It was last weekend.
About an hour ago.
An hour ago. I am just amazed, you know. Michigan, every year, you can count on the weather and the seasons being different. It's always changing, never the same. Does that remind you of anything? Always changing, never the same. Time is always changing, it's never the same. The times are always changing, they're never the same. Is it global warming? I think global warming started at the peak of the Ice Age and has been continually warming a little bit ever since. Is it cyclic? We look at Lake Michigan. In 1986, it peaked. It is now 3 inches higher than it was in 1986, and they say by the middle of July it could be 3 inches higher than it is right now. Did it go back down? Yeah. Is it caused by the melting of the polar ice caps? I look at it this way. This is Michigan. If that moisture is finally making its way here, it's going to snow and it's going to get blown up north, and the ice caps will be back sooner or later. It's just making its way north. That's the way I look at it. But God is always the same. No matter what the weather, no matter what the instance in life, no matter the stage, no matter anything, God is continuously the same. He never changes. The moment God created the earth, the presence of God at that point is the same today in our lives. It's the same God. Everything about Him is exactly the same. Do we change? I hope so. And I hope it's an inward change toward Him and not away from Him. So let's just go to the Lord this morning and ask His blessing on this time that we share. Father, we thank you, we praise you for your love, for never changing, God, for always being constant, for always being the same, for always being the God that we rely on, that we can call on, the God that hears us, even when we don't know it. Even when you're not on our mind, we are on yours, and we thank you. Come be with us this morning. Let us feel the Spirit present in this building. Let us know that you are with us and that we are worshiping with you. Bless you, Father, in Jesus' name. Amen.
I look around, I see my wonderful life, almost perfect from the outside. In picture frames, I see my beautiful wife, always smiling, but on the inside, I can hear her saying, their faces, look in their innocent eyes. They're just children from the outside. I'm working hard, I tell myself they'll be fine. They're independent, but on the inside, I can't hear them saying,
relief. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. The Lord has promised good to me. His word my hope secures. He will my shield and portion be as long as life endures. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace. The earth shall soon dissolve like snow. The sun forbear to shine. But God who called me here below will be forever mine. Will be forever mine. You are forever mine. You are forever mine. My chains are gone, I've been set free. My God, my Savior has ransomed me. And like a flood, His mercy reigns, unending love, amazing grace, amazing love, amazing grace, ending love, amazing grace.
I've heard 1,000 stories of what they think you're like, but I heard the tender whisper of love in the dead of night. You tell me that you're pleased and that I'm never alone. You're a good, good Father.
It's who you are, it's who you are, it's who you are.
And I'm loved by you.
It's who I am, it's who I am, it's who I am.
I've seen many searching for answers far and wide, but I know we're all searching for answers. Only you provide, because you know just what we need before we say your word. You're a good, good Father.
It's who you are, it's who you are, it's who you are.
And I'm loved by you.
It's who I am,
love so undeniable I can hardly speak. Peace so unexplainable I can hardly think as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still as you call me. Deeper still into love. Love, you're a good, good Father.
It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are.
And I'm loved by you.
It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am.
You're a good, good Father.
It's who you are. It's who you are. It's who you are.
And I'm loved by you.
It's who I am. It's who I am. It's who I am.
Your love, oh Lord, reaches to the heavens. Your faithfulness stretches to the sky. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountains. Your justice flows like the ocean's tide. I will lift my voice to worship you, my King. I will find my strength in the shadow of your wings. Your love, oh Lord, reaches to the heavens. Your faithfulness stretches to the sky. Your righteousness is like the mighty mountain. Yeah, your justice flows like the ocean's tide. I will lift my voice to worship you, my King. I will find my strength in the shadow of your wings. I will lift my voice to worship you, my King. I will find my strength in the shadow of your wings. Your love, oh Lord, reaches to the heavens. Your faithfulness stretches to the sky.
Well, today is Father's Day, and we are going to go on into our study of Romans because, of course, I don't know if I'll be able to get through the book of Romans or not, but I want to look at the next section, which is chapters 9, 10, and 11, which is another unit. It's meant to be read as a unit all together, but obviously I'm not going to read all 3 chapters to you this morning. That would take most of our time. But I will pick out some main ideas and key verses from the unit and from each chapter. But if you want to know what is this whole chapter or this unit about, it's answering another question. Remember, Paul tries to answer the questions that these readers already had. And one of the questions, if you're writing to the Romans and a church that was made up of Gentiles and Jews, and so far all the way up to chapter 9, he is arguing in favor of salvation by faith that includes the Gentiles. And so the next question comes up is, well, what about the Jews? Are they included in all this? Or has God rejected the Jews because the Jews rejected their Messiah, their Christ? And so Paul's going to answer that question throughout this whole section. And he's basically going to go back to Abraham and talk about what it means to be a true child of Abraham or of the promise, and what it means to be saved by faith. So that promise now includes not just the children of Abraham, but anybody who accepts Christ becomes, basically, Israel becomes a child of Abraham. And so that in a nutshell is this whole long argument that Paul's going to show here. But, well, I'll get to this in a minute, but I am going to talk about Paul as a spiritual father. And so very few sermons on Father's Day will lift up the Apostle Paul. But I'm going to do it because we're in Romans, and I think it's very appropriate to what we're going to be talking about, because we're going to see Paul's burden for the lost, almost like a father. And he feels this burden for his family, for his people, the Jews. So, next slide, Jesse. I don't know if you remember this song from when you were a kid. I grew up with this song. Yeah, you guys know it. Yeah, you can hear it in your heads, right? You want to do it? Father Abraham had many sons, and many sons had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's just praise the Lord. Right arm, left arm, right foot, left foot, turn around.
No, you do it.
There's all kinds of them.
You do left arm.
You're right, I know. If you do it right, the song lasts about 25 minutes. So, yeah. That's the way.
Then they changed the word and it became the Hokey Pokey.
Yeah, kind of similar to the Hokey Pokey song, isn't it? But this whole study, I could not stop that song going through my head as I'm reading through this all week long and reading about the fact that we are also sons of Abraham through Christ and through our faith. By salvation, by faith, we become the children of the promise, which is a big point that Paul makes all through this passage. But what he starts out with, and the reason I believe this is a great Father's Day message, is that it also shows Paul's fatherly concern for his own people, for his family, the family of Israel, the physical, genetic Jewish people. So look at the next slide, Jesse. This is still kind of an introduction to this, but he feels this as a burden, and that's what I'm going to talk about in a minute, but he feels a great burden for his own people because, I mean, there is this blood relation, and there's this affinity that he feels for his own people, and he feels it as a huge responsibility and a burden starting for the Jews, but then we're also going to see that this burden extends to the Gentiles. In fact, that's how the book of Romans starts out. Chapter 1, that this salvation is first for the Jews and then for the Gentiles. And so Paul is still maintaining this whole theme. And I like the way the Apostle John says the same thing, but from a different point of view. He kind of puts it backwards. So Paul talks about his great burden, and the Apostle John says, there's no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in truth. So we're going to see both sides of this. It's a huge burden, but it's also a great joy. And the point is, there's nothing more important than the salvation of your kids, of your family. And you feel that affinity, and that's what Paul is going to start out with, and we'll get to that in a minute. So I'm not going to read all of chapters 9, 10, and 11, but each chapter has a main idea that I want to get across today, and a couple of key verses. So if you were expecting a verse-by-verse study of 9 and 10, we're not going to get into that, but just a few of those things. So starting off with chapter 9, this is the burden part. This is Paul expressing his burden for his own people. Chapter 9, verse 2 says, I have a great sorrow. Can you feel that? Unceasing anguish in my heart. For I could wish that I myself were cursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my people, those of my own race, the people of Israel. So that expresses some of Paul's heart. And in fact, these whole chapters 9, 10, and 11 is kind of a unique view into Paul's heart. We don't see this so much in the rest of his writings, but right here he talks about this extreme burden. And I don't know a better word for it. He doesn't use the word burden. He talks about anguish, unceasing sorrow. We use that word burden. I grew up in a church that we talked about that I have this burden. And I have a burden for the lost, or I have a burden for my family, or for my kids. And we used to use that language a lot. So maybe we ought to get back to it a little bit to feel that. And I think that's a good thing that Paul did this, and we should see this as an example. And it's a very fatherly type of thing. Now, Paul doesn't use the word love here, but that's what he's expressing, isn't he? I mean, who are you going to feel a burden for? For the people that you love the most. That's what's going to affect your heart, and that's what's going to cause you great joy, but also unceasing anguish. And that's life, right? That's family. That's the way we live. And Ken, when you shared your request this morning, I can just imagine the anguish, the pain that is involved when your children are going through something difficult, something hard like this. We feel that. And we wouldn't feel it if we didn't love. So that's a good thing. And that's what Paul is doing here. And that's what we need to have too. This responsibility, this burden. I think that if there's anything about fatherhood, or even parenthood, or just being a member of your family, this is it. This is the concern for the other person. And there's no greater concern, there's no bigger responsibility than for their salvation. That's what Paul's talking about in this. That's why he feels the anguish, that they have rejected Christ, and so he feels this burden, feels this anguish. And there's no greater responsibility that we feel as parents. I can't think of anything more important. In fact, some of the things that get in the way and get kind of distracting us, even as parents. You know, like sports and activities and all the time-consuming things that we want our kids to experience, and we feel, you know, a responsibility to provide for them, to give them, you know, a good education and clothes on their back and a home and maybe good financial support. You know, we feel those responsibilities. But those responsibilities are nothing compared to their salvation, their eternity with God. I can't think of anything more important. And that's pretty much where Paul is going with this too. There are no other things more important. Not even my goals. Randy talked about that. His goals and dreams for his life. And sometimes we push those off on our kids, right? And it was a good point that you brought up, Randy, that we shouldn't do that. But even our goals, my goals for life, that's nothing compared to the salvation of my kids. So I ought to be willing to make a few sacrifices, even in those areas, for the benefit of my kids. This is a very guilt-inducing sermon today, right? So, but I want us to feel that. I want us to go along with the Apostle Paul on this and feel that there is nothing more important than the salvation of our children. And you can hear the anguish in Paul's voice and his words. Let me read this verse again. It's a startling, amazing verse. He says, I could wish that myself were cursed and cut off from Christ for the sake of my people. Wow. I wonder if I could even say that sometimes. I mean,
that's as close as you can get to Christ. Christ was crucified for us.
Yeah.
And that's basically what he was calling out, or putting on paper, is he would be crucified for the sake of his people.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Look at the next slide, Jesse. I think, yeah, I'm still talking about this burden that we feel. And that incredible sentiment from Paul. And I used to look at this verse before I was a father, thinking, nobody could say that. Nobody could honestly, I mean, well, why would anybody even want to say something like that? I wished that I was damned and going to hell so that my kids would be saved. Wow. That's a pretty amazing thing to say. It's almost like I always thought, well, he's just over-exaggerating. But now that I'm a father, I kind of understand how he could say that. Because his love is so strong for his people that he says, I could wish this. He doesn't say, I do wish it. He said, I could almost wish this. I could almost say that I would be willing to be cut off if it meant the salvation of somebody else. That's a pretty strong burden. And part of that anguish and part of that burden, next slide, Jesse, there's a letter B under this, is that we understand this as parents, and we need to understand this, that the salvation of our kids is not our choice. It's theirs. They have their decision to make. It's not automatic. Just because they grew up in my home or in my family or in a church, that doesn't automatically make them Christians. I always heard this phrase, God has no grandchildren. Have you heard that before? It was, actually, I looked it up, it was Corrie ten Boom who first said this, quoted from her. She said that, just growing up in a Christian home does not make you a Christian because God has no grandchildren. That means everybody has to make a decision on their own for Christ. In fact, the majority of chapter 9, in case you're wondering if I'm still sticking to the Bible, yeah, I am. The majority of chapter 9 explains this concept that everybody has to make their own personal choice, and that choice is what makes you a child of Abraham. That's what makes you a child of God, a child of the promise, and that's what makes you saved. It doesn't happen automatically. And because of that, and Paul goes into this in chapter 9, that's the reason why being a Jew doesn't make you saved, but it also makes it open to the Gentiles. So you can get salvation by faith, and you can become a child of Abraham through Christ that way. So I put on there the pictures of, anybody know who that is on the screen?
I can't think of his name, but I know.
Oh, I was thinking of these young people. They would probably have no clue who that is. The first man who walked on the moon? Armstrong, yeah. Neil Armstrong. Very good. You at least learned your history, right? Well, you weren't born. I was 3 years old when he did this. 50 years ago, this month, well actually next month in July, we're going to start hearing about this, the 50th anniversary of the first man walking on the moon. You watched it happen? I watched it happen too, but I don't remember it.
There's still people that believe that it was staged.
Yeah, I have heard that. Yeah. Betty thinks it's staged.
My oldest.
Yeah, there are flat earth people, and there's conspiracy. Yeah. Well,
They held it out with a rod.
yeah, it's actually aluminum. I don't think it's anyway, I'm not going to get into this conspiracy theories about that. But Neil Armstrong, 50 years ago, July 20th, 1969, walked on the moon for the first time. And I don't remember it, although I do remember that subsequent missions. I remember Apollo 14 and 15, but I don't remember the other ones. This was Apollo 11, so I do remember the later ones watching it. But I was only 3.5 when this happened. And it's interesting that, of course, we're going to start hearing about this, we're going to start talking about it, and in fact I saw an article this week, that's why I brought it up. And Neil Armstrong, actually he died 7 years ago, at the age of 82, so we can't go to him and say, okay, Neil, what was it like to be the first man to walk on the moon? We can't do that. So what do reporters do now? If they can't go to Neil Armstrong and interview him, who is they going to interview? They're going to interview his relatives and his kids. And so this whole article is about his 2 boys that were alive at the time. The older Rick is the older one, and Mark is the younger one. You can see him off to the side there. And Mark, the younger one, was only 6, so he wasn't a whole lot older than me. And so his answer to the reporter is, I don't remember. Because the question was, what was it like watching your dad walk on the moon? And he said, I was only 6 at the time. I don't remember. It was only later that I understood the significance of what my dad did. You see, that experience of Neil Armstrong could not be passed on to his kids. You can interview them all you want, and they're not going to be able to tell you what it's like to walk on the moon. Because that experience has to be personal, has to be individual. So you see where I'm going with this? Our experience with Christ. We can't. Yeah, we can tell about it. Yeah. But it's not automatic. It doesn't go to our kids. And hopefully they see it in us, and we're going to talk about that in a minute too, about how do we pass on the faith. But it's not automatic. Just because I'm a Christian and a follower and committed to Christ does not mean my kids will be. It's certainly not automatic. They have to make that choice for themselves. So, what do we do? Well, Paul goes on into chapter 10 to talk about that whole issue. What do we do? Next slide, Jesse. And we're going to talk about a father's beautiful feet. Hopefully this will help stick it in your mind a little bit, because I don't know about you, but my dad does not have beautiful feet, so neither do I. But chapter 9 explains that with this heavy, heavy burden that we have as parents for our kids, what do we do about it? Well, there's two things, and I'm going to talk about them, but the first one is to pray. To pray for them. And Paul even does this in chapter 9, verse 1. He says, my heart's desire and prayer to God for the Israelites, for my kids, for my children, is that they may be saved. Now, Paul doesn't spend a lot of time on this. It's just mentioned right there at the beginning. But this is the first and best thing we can do. If our kids are not walking with the Lord, if they're not walking in truth, if our family is not where it should be, or if some of them aren't, and we all have that, and that's, there's no perfect families. We all need to be praying for our families, for our kids, for our relations. And Paul felt this and said that this is my heart's desire. There's kind of the same thing. Heart's desire and prayer is the same thing, isn't it? That's what he felt, this heart desire. And so he would bring this desire to God in prayer. And I would go on to say that this means really praying, spending time. Get down on your knees, fast and pray. That's another thing we don't do very much anymore, do we? Just actually praying for the spiritual welfare of our families, of our kids. And that's a very important thing. I don't want to move on to over this too fast. In fact, I may have shared this story with you before, but I remember when I turned 18 years old, and I was feeling kind of independent. I was moving away from my family. I was going to college, and I was feeling that energy. And so I went up to my dad and I said, Dad, what would you do if I decided to turn away from God and the church and just go my own way? Because I wasn't contemplating doing that, but just feeling that independence, I just wanted to, put it in my dad's court and say, look, Dad, I could do this if I wanted to, right? And I'll never forget his answer. And this is still my answer to today, and it's for my kids too. He said to me, your mom and I would get down on our knees and we would start praying. And we would not stop until you came back to God. Wow. That was more serious than I was hoping for or expecting. But it's so true. Now, I know he didn't mean he would physically be on his knees for years without moving, but I know that he meant that he would not stop praying until each of us kids was back where we belong. And I know he's had to do that in our family, and it made a difference. So prayer, that's big. I don't want to skip over that too fast. But then Paul spends the majority of chapter 10 explaining that besides pray, we should proclaim it. We should talk about Christ to our families and to our kids. And again, he gets into this whole emphasis that it's a personal decision, that each person has to make this decision. But when they do, then they can know Christ. In fact, I didn't put it on the screen, but those famous verses from chapter 10, verses 9 and 10, say, if you declare with your mouth Jesus is Lord, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So he's explaining the plan of salvation again. For it is with your heart that you believe and are justified, and it is with your mouth that you profess your faith and are saved. Those are great verses, good ones to memorize and share with somebody. Because Paul goes on from those two verses to talk about the fact that it is not possible for somebody to come to Christ, to come to faith, to believe, if they haven't heard. Right? How can you accept Christ when you haven't heard? How can you believe in something that you've never had explained to you? And so Paul uses those words. He says, how can they hear unless somebody preaches to them? Now, that's kind of an unfortunate translation, because we've taken that translation and that passage and we've assigned all evangelism to preachers. And that's really not what Paul meant. A better word would be to proclaim, or to talk about it, to explain it. Everybody can do that. You don't have to be a preacher to memorize verses 9 and 10 and tell people that if you believe in your heart that Jesus is Lord and confess it with your mouth, you will be saved. Done. You can do that. You can tell it to your kids.
For Romans, there's a thing called the Road to Salvation.
Yeah, there's
where
a...
you start, like in the beginning, and there's different verses that you can go to explain salvation to somebody.
Yeah, it's a great plan. It's called the Romans Road. And it goes from chapter 3, which we talked about, and chapter 6, and then it hits this verse in chapter 9. So, yeah. And I think there's even one other one, I forget. It's a 4-step plan of salvation. So yeah, Romans is really all about this. So these are great verses. And so Paul says that's why we have to explain it. We have to talk about it. We have to tell our kids, tell our family. It's not going to happen automatically. You can pray, but they still are not going to have a chance unless they hear, unless somebody tells them about it. And then he uses this phrase, this verse that I wanted to spend a little time on, verse 15. How beautiful are the feet of those who bring good news. So this is like the whole point number 2, is that a father's beautiful feet. And again, I'm going to make a big deal of this in the second service when my dad's here. And I said, my dad has ugly, ugly feet. I don't know if you've ever seen my dad's feet, but they are not especially pretty. I don't know about you, but my feet aren't especially pretty. I would never be a good foot model. So this guy in the picture, he's got really nice looking feet, right? And he's got some little kid standing on his feet, and it's really a cute picture. But I don't know about you, but feet are just not one thing I really look at very much. It's just not something you think of as being beautiful. And you especially never think of your dad's feet as being all that beautiful. But what this verse means is that if you proclaim and if you talk about salvation, you have to do it in a way that is attractive, that is beautiful. There are ways of proclaiming and preaching at your kids. That's why I think preaching is an unfortunate translation, because in our day it means a negative thing, doesn't it? To preach at somebody. That's not beautiful. That doesn't feel like good news. And kids need it, good news. And so I talk about my dad has ugly feet, but actually he has very beautiful feet. Because his walk always lined up with his talk. That's part of having good news, right? That's beautiful feet. And your feet line up with what you say. And so I never, ever saw that in my dad, that he didn't follow what he said. That he didn't do what he told us to do. It always lined up. So that was beautiful. But he also explained the gospel to us as kids in a way that was attractive. It was not condemning. It was not shaming. It was love and acceptance. So it was not hard for us as kids to come to know Christ and to believe and to accept it. In fact, growing up in my dad's home, I have a hard time remembering when did I first accept Christ. I just always knew, because he always talked about it, and it always was beautiful, and it was always something that we wanted to do. So I'm not saying it was automatic, but at the same time, it was attractive because of my dad's beautiful feet. So we need to have beautiful feet too, don't we? That means our feet line up with what we say and the way we proclaim the gospel. We have to be good news. If you're bad news, people won't want to listen to what you have to say. Okay, let's go on. Number 3, chapter 11. We don't have time to spend a lot on this, and I kept this really short anyway. But chapter 11 is really a fascinating study on how the Gentiles are part of God's family. And Paul talks about them being grafted in like a shoot or a branch that's grafted into an older tree. And it's a beautiful picture of adoption, how God adopts us into his family. And he will talk about how the Jews have to do this too. It's not just automatic for them either. But we all are adopted into God's family. And the point I want to make is that Paul, with his huge burden and his concern for his own family, for the Jews, his heart is still big enough to go after the Gentiles, to try to reach those who are outside his family. Look at verses 13 and 14. This is the next slide. There it is. He says, I'm talking to you Gentiles in this part. Inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I take pride in my ministry, in the hope that I may somehow arouse my own people to envy and save some of them. Now, that's an interesting way to put it. He just says, since my own family has rejected Christ, I'm going to go after some Gentiles now, and maybe they're going to see that and become jealous, and they'll accept Christ too. It's an interesting concept. But the idea that I want to get across is that Paul's heart was big enough to go after Gentiles as well as his own people. It didn't just end with the Jews. It didn't end with his own family, and it didn't end with his own home. He was willing to go outside and be a spiritual father to many others. In fact, Timothy, he talks about Timothy, you are my son in the faith. And Timothy was a Gentile. So Paul shows this, and he actually does it as well. And he calls himself the apostle to the Gentiles because his heart was that big. So here's the conclusion, Jesse, and next, there it is. I'm going to mention this in context with that third point as well, that we are willing to go outside even of our own homes and families. Because the burden that I'm talking about, this fatherly burden, it starts there. Because you feel the biggest burden for the people you love the most. And that's natural. It will be your kids. It will be your family, your relation. And Paul felt this for his family, the Jews. But it doesn't end there. It goes on from there, that you also have a fatherly burden for those that are not your family. So that means every one of you here can have a fatherly burden. Ladies, young people, fur families, you can still have a fatherly burden for the lost, for people outside your family. And you can have a father's beautiful feet. It starts with your family. You better have beautiful feet to your kids. But you also have beautiful feet that will proclaim and pray and share and be good news to those outside your family too. So you all can have a father's beautiful feet. And we all need to have this father's big heart, because that is God's heart. God's heart is so big, there's always room for one more person. And He loves each one of us as children, no grandchildren. We are all His sons, His daughters, through our faith in Jesus Christ. What do you think? Happy Father's Day to all of you, fur families and everything. Let's stand and close in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning and we call you our Father, because as we have sung already, you are a good, good Father. Lord, I know that as we talk about Father's Day today, that sometimes this has mixed emotions, or causes mixed emotions in us, because not all of us had perfect fathers, and not all of us were perfect fathers, or are perfect fathers, and we've all messed up, and we've all been messed up in one way or another. But we can look to you as our Heavenly Father and know that you are perfect, you are good, and if there was something that we did not get from our earthly fathers, we can count on you for that love and acceptance. And Lord, you have called us to share this fatherly burden for the world, for those around us, including and starting with our families. And Lord, we do that this morning. I pray for families. I pray for our kids, those that may or may not be walking with you this morning. Lord, only you know their hearts, but as parents and as family members, we usually have a pretty good idea from their fruit where they may stand. So Lord, we earnestly and with an anguished heart and with burdens, we pray for them. Pray that you will draw them to you. They will hear the good news and that they will accept it and be saved. Lord, help us to be that good news. And I know for most of us, our kids are grown and have left the home, but at the same time, our responsibility has not stopped. That we still have an audience, we still have the ability to talk, and to share, and to speak this good news and explain it to our kids, to our grandkids, and to our families. Lord, let us be that good news to those outside the family too, to reach out to those that we're not related to feel love and to feel a burden for lost people, and that we would be good news to them as well. Lord, give us opportunities this week, we pray, to share and to take our beautiful feet to somebody that needs to hear. And we pray that that person will hear and accept and believe and become a child of God. We thank you for your Holy Spirit that gives us the power to do this, because we are powerless on our own. You work in us and through us. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, guys. You're dismissed.